Hey, welcome to Think Thursday from the Alcohol Minimalist Podcast. Think Thursday is all about your beautiful, brilliant human brain. We're talking neuroscience. We're talking behavior change. We are talking about your mindset. Are you ready to get started? Let's go. Hello, and welcome to Think Thursday from the Alcohol Minimalist. Ready to talk about that beautiful, brilliant human brain of yours? Great, because that's what these Thursdays are all about. And you know, I love talking about neuroscience and mindset and all things that are related to our brains and behavior change. So I want you to think about the last vacation you took. You probably don't remember every breakfast, every conversation, every hour that you spent driving, or every time you asked where the room key was, right? Instead, a few moments are likely doing most of the work. Maybe it was a spectacular view, a dinner where everyone laughed, or a travel delay on the way home when everyone was exhausted. And suddenly the entire trip felt a little less magical. And that is because memory is not an even-handed recording of everything that happens. Your brain selects things, it compresses, and it creates a story. And when it creates that story, two moments can carry more weight than we might expect. The most emotionally intense moment and the way the experience ended. It's actually something called the peak end rule. I first read about the peak end rule in one of my favorite books ever. I read about it in the book Being Mortal. I've never mentioned it probably on this specific podcast, but I did a full podcast episode on it over on the Big Podcast, and I really recommend it. A book for everyone to read, Being Mortal by Dr. Atul Gawande. I read about this concept of the peak end rule in that book, but he references it from another book called Thinking Fast and Slow, which is Daniel Kahneman and his colleague's book. And that book he calls a sentinel book within Being Mortal. So I tried to read Thinking Fast and Slow. It's a very long book, and I've gotten through some of it, but the peak end rule, and that's what psychologist Daniel Kahneman, who's a Nobel Peace Prize winner, if I remember correctly, he did this research known on it and came up with this concept called the peak end rule. And this is what they learned. In one experiment, participants completed two uncomfortable trials involving very cold water. And in the first trial, they kept one hand submerged in cold water for 60 seconds. And in the second trial, they kept the other hand submerged for the same 60 seconds, followed by another 30 seconds during which the water became slightly warmer. It was still uncomfortable, but the discomfort eased near the end. Objectively, the second trial included more total discomfort because it lasted longer. Yet, when participants were asked which experience they would rather repeat, many chose the longer one. Why? Because it ended better. Their memory of the experience was influenced less by the total amount of pain and more by the most intense discomfort and how they felt near the end. And researchers found something similar outside the laboratory when they studied patients who were undergoing uncomfortable medical procedures. Patients continuously rated their pain during colonoscopies and other procedures, and when they later evaluated the experience as a whole, their memories were strongly influenced by the most painful moment and the pain they felt near the end. The total length of the procedure mattered less than we might expect. In a later randomized trial, some colonoscopy patients had a brief additional interval added to the procedure, and this made the procedure slightly longer, but the final moments were less uncomfortable than the peak. And those patients tended to remember the experience more favorably. And there was some evidence that they were more likely to return for another colonoscopy in the future. And that sounds almost irrational. Why would someone prefer an experience that contained more total discomfort? Because the person living through an experience and the person remembering it do not always evaluate it the same way. The experiencing self lives every moment, and the remembering self creates the story afterward. And that story matters because it helps the brain decide what to approach, what to avoid, and what to expect next time. Of course, most of us are not deciding which cold water experiment we would like to repeat, but we are constantly using remembered experiences to make future choices. If a difficult conversation ends with blame, silence, or someone walking away, your brain may store the entire conversation as pointless, as dangerous. If a workout ends with you criticizing everything you could not do, your brain may remember it less as an act of care and more as evidence that you are failing. If you end the day mentally reviewing every unfinished task and awkward moment, those final moments can become the summary your brain carries into tomorrow. Now, this does not mean the middle of an experience doesn't matter. A pleasant ending cannot make an unhealthy relationship healthy. A relaxing hour cannot transform a miserable vacation. And a polite goodbye does not erase a harmful conversation. The peak end rule is not permission to ignore the whole experience. It is simply a reminder that memory is selective. And because it's selective, endings deserve more attention than we often give them. This is especially useful in behavior change because new behaviors are rarely graceful in the beginning. You try something unfamiliar, you feel awkward. You make mistakes, you do less than you planned. Then at the end, you say, "That was terrible. I'm obviously not good at this." The judgment becomes part of the experience. Now, imagine ending the same attempt by saying, "That was harder than I expected, but I showed up and I know one thing that will help me next time." The attempt itself has not changed. You still felt awkward, you still made mistakes, you still did less than you intended. But you have helped your brain create a different memory, difficult but manageable, imperfect but useful, uncomfortable but worth trying again. That's not false positivity. That it is a more complete account of what happened. And the same principle can change how we end a difficult day. Many people climb into bed and begin what amounts to a nightly performance review. What didn't I finish? Why did I say that? What do I need to worry about tomorrow? Meanwhile, the good conversation, the thing you handled well, the walk you took, or the small a moment that made you laugh, receives almost no attention. You do not need to force yourself to declare that every day was wonderful. You can simply ask, what else was true today? Maybe the day was frustrating and you still handled one moment better than you would have a year ago. Maybe you were tired and you followed through on something that mattered. Maybe you allowed yourself to rest instead of turning exhaustion into a character flaw. You're not rewriting the day, you are preventing its most negative final moment from becoming the entire story. We can also create more thoughtful endings to conversations. Not every difficult conversation ends in agreement or resolution. Sometimes the best ending available is, "I don't think we're going to solve this tonight, but I'm glad we talked about it." Or, "I need some time to think, and I do want to come back to this." That does not erase the disagreement. It gives the conversation a sense of continuation rather than catastrophe. Vacations are another obvious example. Several good days can be overshadowed by a final morning filled with packing, traffic, tired people trying to leave the rental house by 10. We cannot always change the logistics, but we can create a closing moment. Take one last look at the view. Ask everyone to share a favorite part of their trip. Choose one photograph that captures what you want to remember. The ending does not have to be elaborate. It simply helps the brain recognize that the stressful departure is not the whole experience. And then there are imperfect attempts end with phrases like, I blew it. I can never stick to anything. There's no point now. And those endings turn one event into a verdict. One missed workout becomes evidence that you never follow through. One difficult choice becomes proof that you can't change. One bad afternoon becomes the end of the entire effort. Instead, try ending an imperfect attempt with 3 questions. What happened? What did I learn? And what is the next best step? What happened keeps you with the facts. What did I learn gives the experience value. What's the next best step ends the story with agency instead of helplessness. And the next step may be trying again tomorrow. It may be changing the plan, apologizing, asking for help, deciding that the original goal needs to be reworked, pivoting, right? Ending with agency does not always mean continuing in the same direction. It means refusing to let one difficult moment write the final sentence for you. So this week, I want to invite you to experiment with one intentional ending. Choose something that often ends abruptly or negatively: your workday, your evening, your exercise routine, a recurring meeting, or a difficult conversation. Before you move on, pause for a moment and ask, what do I want my brain to carry forward from this? You may not control the peak moment. Life will continue to deliver joy, frustration, surprises, and the occasional complete disaster. But you may have some influence over the final note. And that note matters because endings do not remain at the end. They become part of what we remember, what we expect, and whether we are willing to begin again. Peak, end. The peak moments, the end moments. It's the peak end rule. And if you want to learn more about it, go check out Dr. Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, or, as I mentioned, Being Mortal. That's all I have for you today, my friends. Until next time, choose peace, and I will see you on Monday.